Welcome to the Work to Live podcast. I'm Mike DiNatale. This week's episode, I sit down with Ben Smidt, a co-founder and the brains behind all of the machine learning at the Austin-based startup ClipsAI. In this conversation, we dive into how to build the discipline required to teach yourself new skills, how to deal with imposter syndrome when you're pursuing new things, the importance of talking to customers early on when you're building a new product or a new service, and the overall importance of having a higher purpose behind any pursuit. If you enjoyed this conversation, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. That's the best way you could support. Without further ado, here is Ben Smidt. Thank you for joining me here on the podcast, man.
Of course.
Previously, I spoke with your friend, and you're the co-founder of your company, ClipsAI. I spoke with Armel, and after speaking with him, I seemed like a pretty good idea to speak with you too. He had some good things to say about you, so thanks again for reaching out. So hey, just to start and to set some context for the conversation, can you give us a brief summary of what ClipsAI is and what the company does?
Yeah, for sure. So ClipsAI is a AI software. It's a tool that helps you automatically repurpose long-form content, so a podcast like we're doing now, a webinar, things like that, into short clips. So 30-second clips for Instagram, TikTok, social media, etc. So that's a tool as it is right now. We could talk about where we want it to go, but that's the current form at the moment.
And what's your role within ClipsAI? How do you contribute to the company?
Yeah, so I do most of the backend and the machine learning stuff. So that just means all the logic behind the website. I code that stuff, and then all the logic behind the application in terms of how does the video get converted to clips. That's my main job. We can go deeper if you want.
That was going to be my follow-up question is, how does that process work? How did you learn the skills it required to do all of that?
So I've only been coding for maybe 18 months to 2 years, something like that. And so I was actually a mechanical engineer. So I'm a junior in college right now at UT Austin, and I switched into computer engineering, last summer, so a year ago from now. And when we decided to go on this journey, and we were so there's three of us, there's Vedant, Armel, and myself, and we were okay, Ben, you're going to do the technical stuff. At that point, it was kind of a crazy idea to set me on that stuff. But we did it because I wanted to, and we did it because, just because I had a passion for it. But I guess going back to, how I learned all that stuff is really, I spent a lot of time figuring out what exactly we needed to do. So there's a lot of definitions in terms of okay, we need to take this long form content and turn it into some clips. And I spent hours, just really months, figuring out exactly the stuff you need to know. So there's a lot of machine learning, a lot of math, a lot of CS. And so I've spent probably ballpark it 4 to 6 hours a day for maybe 6 months just learning the math, the computer science, the machine learning needed to get to that point, just to even start building. And that's continued through since we've started.
What is it that draws you to computer science and programming and building things? Where do you trace the origins of that interest or desire to?
Yeah, I think it's one thing that I think is kind of an interesting idea or something that people kind of get wrong in engineering is that engineering to me is one of the most creative disciplines you could actually be a part of, because engineering to me at least is fundamentally about creating something new. And to do that, you need, that's to be creative, you need novelty. That is definitionally part of creativity to me, right? Is that you're taking things together and you're creating something new. And I think doing that in the context of computers and CS is really beautiful because it's an arena where you have the most room to operate, if that makes sense. So there's, you have a lot of constraints in the physical world, right? You have a lot of, I have to go buy this, I have to talk to these people, I have to wait 3 weeks from Amazon to get all my parts, et cetera, et cetera. When you're talking about CS, you just have to go learn how to code it. And there's so many ways that you can build on top of whatever ideas people have made so far that are just free. You can just do it. And so there's this freedom in CS along with the creativity that in CS when you're right or wrong. The computer would tell you. You have an output, you want to see that output, and you're no, that's not what I want. So you go do it again and again and again. And there's something about that feedback loop tied with the novelty and the satisfaction of getting to that outcome that is just I love it. It's beautiful. And it's just, it consumes me, to be honest. So,
did you consider yourself a creative kid growing up, or has it always been geared more towards this engineering lane and it's the creative aspect within the engineering that it always scratched your itch?
I never considered myself to be creative much at all, actually. I thought of myself as someone who's very rigid, or not rigid, but very, very logical. I start here, step 1, step 2, step 3. And that kind of fit into the engineering discipline, I guess, or what everyone told me engineering was like, is that you follow this methodology, you follow these set of ideas, and you'll get to the right answer. And to some extent, people say that for math as well. But I think I got into it and I realized that there's something unique about when you understand the reasoning behind all this methodology and how people came to develop these techniques, that was a creative act in and of itself. And if you can understand how they got there, you can learn from it and create new methodologies and new things. And so I think that part, I realized that I was actually pretty good at taking what people have already done, learning from that, and creating something new. And it was that part that really put me over the edge, let's say. So short answer, I did not think of myself as creative, but I think I've come to think of myself as creative in certain arenas.
Hearing you talk about CS and engineering makes me wish that you were my college advisor or something, because I've always been a technical person. Math was always my best class. And for some reason, I never really seriously considered engineering. I just went in the math and business route and in the finance lane. And sometimes over the past decade or so, since I've graduated college, I found myself wishing I went to engineering, because you're creating something. Like you said, you're using that creativity. You're using your math skills, your technical skills, but you're applying it into something tangible. And that's something that's been a miss for me with finance, is like, it's all these numbers in the cloud, the numbers on a computer screen. They're real things, but it's not like you're dealing with actual things. And so it's fun to hear you talk about it in this way and describe it so passionately as well. It clearly resonates with me that this is something that you feel very strongly about. I want to circle back a bit to ClipsAI, and just a brief backstory. If you correct me if I'm summarizing this wrong, you and Armel started a podcast. You guys were filming long form conversations. You wanted to cut down clips to repurpose them to put them online. You found out there's a very tedious process. You guys tried to hire someone to do it for you. Didn't really work out. And then so I believe, if I'm getting this right, Armel had the idea that, hey, maybe there might be a business opportunity here, because if we're struggling with this, other people might be as well. Is that summary accurate?
That's pretty much to a T. Yeah, that's exactly what happened. He kind of actually saw me struggling, because I was doing the editing stuff. So I would actually spend like 3 hours or 4 hours a week just repurposing those clips, and then I'd be like, this sucks, and he'd be like, you've been saying that like since we started. And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, let's just build some software and let's do it. And I'm like, at first I was kind of like, really? Like, that's, I don't know, like, why? Like, it seems like a lot of work just to do it. And then he kind of kept saying it over and over, and then it hit me. I was like, this is like a great idea. I don't know how I didn't see this the first time, but yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you next. When we had spoke previously, you had mentioned that the first few times Armel brought it up as a potential business opportunity, you kind of shrugged it off. Why did it eventually click for you? How did he eventually convince you to see that there might be an opportunity there and there's something worth exploring here?
Yeah, well, I mean, two things there. I think first of all is Armel's a convincing person. But the second thing is we really started it because we really thought it'd just be an interesting thing to do. I mean, oddly enough, I think it's just because we're young and we don't really know much, but we were just like, yeah, we'll just make it as a project over the summer. We thought it might take a few weeks or a month, maybe 2. It turns out it takes a lot longer than that. But as we got into it, we realized that it really would be a good business opportunity. So we initially started working on it. I agreed to do it because I just wanted to, just because it was something that I thought would be interesting. I thought I would learn a lot. I kind of followed along with the track that I wanted to do in life. It was very much, I want to work on computer engineering stuff, CS stuff, computer science stuff, and this was like right up the alley. And so I was like, let's start there. And then as we kept going along, I was like, people need this. We started talking to people, and people were like, yeah, like if you could make this, I don't even know how much I would pay you. Like that's how much worth, And we were just like, well, sweet. Like we can make something that's worthwhile, that's interesting to us and helpful to the world. Like why would I not do that? So it was a slow process, but eventually once I said yes, it kind of exponentially sped up in terms of we were like, yeah, all the boxes are checked right now. Like we just got to just keep going. Why stop?
Armel had explained that you guys, after you had the initial idea, you went out and you reached out to 30 different podcasters or people who are creating similar types of content, and you just asked them, hey, what are your biggest pain points? And he said, I think he estimated 28 out of the 30 people came back and said making clips and repurposing it. He said it was almost unanimous.
Yeah, no, it was crazy because we're just one data point. Like, we don't know anyone else. So I was just like, in my head, I was thinking like, odds are there's nothing here, right? We talked to one person, clips, I just hate making it. It's too much out, too many hours. Okay, cool. And next person, same thing. Next person, same thing. And we're like 25 people in, and maybe one person or another said no, but for a variety of reasons, they might have not fit the mold that we were actually thinking of. Maybe they were making content that was adjacent. They were doing something that really couldn't be clipped. So things like that. But on the whole, it was just like, we were just blown away really about how many people were trying to do podcasts or other long form content. And it would actually, not only would they complain about making the clips, they would actually talk about how they would stop podcasting because it was so much work to make the clips. Because it took so much time. And we were like, this is a real problem.
My question is, as you guys are going through that process and you go through the first few people, everybody is pointing to the same thing, 5, 10 people, you're getting the same responses. How did you get up to 30? Why did you guys preset that number? Hey, we're going to try to talk to X amount of people. How did you determine, why not stop at 15 or 20? Why did you keep going and get even more? I mean, it's obviously great that you did. I'm just curious what your thought process there was along the way, along the journey in terms of validating that idea that it's an actual pain point for the majority of people doing this.
When we first started doing this, Armel and Vedant in particular were very pointed about listening to a lot of previous startup founders and a lot of people in the space who had said stuff. And one thing we heard over and over and over was like, you have to talk to users or potential customers or, whoever might use your product. You have to talk to them. And there's never too many people you can talk to. So they were kind of, Armel, he'll say something to me that would be kind of like, I'm like, really? He'd be like, we need to interview 500 people. And I'm like, are you serious? That's like a person a day until like a year. Like, that doesn't make sense. Like, right? And I'm just like, I feel like 30 is enough. So at some point I was kind of like, guys, seriously. And they were kind of, Armel led up. He was like, yeah, no, I think we're onto something. And so we still talk to people a lot. But yeah, it was kind of this tension actually where they listened to some people, very credible people, more credible than us, in the startup space, and we were like, yeah, let's do that. And then eventually we were just like, yeah, this is for sure like something that people experience.
Going back to your contribution being working on the machine learning aspect of it, for us laymen, how would you describe machine learning and how it applies to what you do, how it works with ClipsAI?
So it takes your video, it transcribes that, and then it's going to go through all the sentences or kind of just generally speaking, like semantically meaningful parts of the transcript. So kind of a sentence is the easiest way to think about it. And it's just kind of going to look through and say, is this sentence the start or the end of a topic or a section of the clip that is actually coherent? So it might say, does this sentence begin a clip or a topic or a section of the video that is coherent, and then it'll look for the end as well. And so it just kind of goes through there, and that's the initial idea, right? Like, you just want to start it. It's very simple, right? You're just looking at the words. There's no audio input at the beginning, right? There's nothing else. It's just that. And so in the background, there's a lot of math, right? The math is essentially you have some function, and you're trying to get the math to work out such that you are trying to meet the objectives of that function.
And all of these processes that you learned, this is all self-taught, or is this learned through your major here at UT as well?
A lot of the mathematical foundations I already had the prereqs for at UT, but all of the machine learning, I've actually never taken an ML course at UT. Really, all of the actual work that we do, I've just taught myself through any and every resource I can find. That includes textbooks, public courses.
What have you found to be most particularly helpful?
Really, Stanford, MIT, they put out really great courses where they'll actually put an entire series of machine learning courses online, complete with the lectures, the assignments, the exams, and really great references. And so you can watch those lectures, do the assignments, and really you can really sit with the material and get a feel for it. And then from there, you can understand the research papers and go make something new. And definitely those lectures has been really helpful because textbooks are great, but it's hard to get a complete understanding of something unless you interact with it. You really have to actually do it, solve some problems, really get gritty with it before you understand it. At least in ML, that's what I found. It's really hard to understand it if you don't actually code it.
Obviously, that sounds like a ton of work, very tedious stuff you got to get through, a lot of trial and error, I imagine, as well. And it brings me back to something that Armel had mentioned about you as well last time we spoke. I have the quote here. He said, "Ben is very disciplined. He's the core of how we think about our execution." It's obviously very high praise, but seems like it checks out to teach yourself machine learning, do these online courses in your free time when you're a full-time student as well, invest all the time and energy to learn all this stuff. Seems like it probably requires a large amount of discipline. Where does that come from? Is it just due to your interest in the topic that it doesn't feel like work? Is that it? Or is it, how do you make sense of that? How do you explain it?
I mean, I guess first of all, thank you. I appreciate the praise. I don't know if I can live up to it, but I will say that I do have a generally good ability to focus, and I would say there's a few things there. I feel like I'm just like a naturally curious person. So that's one thing. I think I've read a few books on like motivation, or one or two, and I forget the exact title. But essentially, there's an interesting idea, which is that curiosity can get you focus or motivation for free. Which is that like you can, if you're really curious about something, you'll just keep going. Like it doesn't feel like work at all. So that's one thing. I did karate for like 5 or 6 years when I was younger, and I think one thing that always helped me was we would go in and we would sit down for the first 5 minutes of class, and you would just sit there and you'd meditate, which is interesting, I guess. But so we would meditate, and I think just having to sit down at so I was young, I was like 6 or something, right? So having to do that, and then also I eventually got my black belt, and I would actually lead courses and things like that. So I think that experience, it taught me a lot of discipline and focus being in karate for that long, because they trusted me a lot. And there's been a lot of scenarios in my life where people have said like, "Ben, would you like to do X?" And I'm kind of like, "Sure, why not? Let's do it." So I think it's some combination of curiosity, I just really would like to know, as well as I do have a good ability to say like, "You're gonna do this. You said you wanted to do this, and when it's hard, like, keep going. Like you got it." So I think that's nothing revolutionary there. I don't know. Maybe I could give you. There are plenty of tactics and tips and tricks and things like that, and we could talk about those that I've tried to implement over the past few years. But I think at its core, I think those two reasons are kind of the foundation on which I've built a lot of my focus and discipline.
Two other things that stand out to me, which you could refute if it's not true, but I think might be a contributing factor, at least in this situation. One, I think, is the fact that you had a goal in mind. You were learning for ClipsAI. It's one thing to say, "Hey, I want to learn, say, for instance, another language." Right. It's another thing to say, "Hey, I want to learn another language because I'm going to this country in 2 months and I don't want to be able to not communicate with anybody." So I think maybe that might be one thing. I think the other thing that comes up for me is the fact that you're doing it with friends as well. There was a social component, the accountability, maybe that made it a bit more enjoyable as well.
100%. Yeah. I think that, so I think at first it really was like, I was really curious. I really was. But I think like as you go on, everyone reaches some point where you're kind of like, do I want to keep doing this, right? And you reach that maybe, I don't know how many times, who knows? And I think you're absolutely right, which is that like there's something about having a higher purpose, a higher, when I think about, I'm in the middle of, it's 8 a.m, whatever, it's before school, I have, however many things to do, but I'm working on trying to learn this because it's important to me. And in my mind, I'm thinking like, what is the ultimate goal? Well, the goal is that one day someone can just sit down and make content and we can automate the rest for them. And that would be amazing, right? Because I think that the downstream impact of that would be great. And I think that we have benefited so much from content. And we talked about this before a little bit, but, Armel and I, or everyone in my generation has really been around the internet for as long as you can remember. And we've benefited so much from resources like YouTube or TikTok or Instagram. Really YouTube, though, has been huge. And having grown up on that content and learning so much from it, it feels obvious to us how impactful it could be to help other people make content or give them time to make more content or make that content more marketable or make it easier to get out. We would like the best content to be available. So all of those things are important and they speak to us. So when things get really hard, that is what you fall back on, right? The day-to-day monotony of anything will get you if you don't have that higher reason.
Do you have any memorable moments where you're almost like, screw this, I'm done? Does anything come to mind? Or are there too many to count maybe?
Well, I definitely think that one thing that was really hard was like going through this, not having any real background in ML that is like professional or any. I definitely have like to this day like imposter syndrome of like, do I really know this? Like, do we even know what we're doing? Like, why are we the ones that are really gonna win this, right? Those doubts creep in a lot because it just feels sometimes like overwhelming to try to attack this with just complete confidence and veracity. And so 100%, there's days where you're just kind of like you don't feel like you're good enough sometimes. And those days are really the harder days, right? Because you can always want it, but if you don't believe you can do it, that's a different problem. And that's a hard problem to face.
How have you navigated those moments where you felt overwhelmed, where you felt like as an imposter? Anything in particular helped you in those situations to keep going forward?
I think one thing is like I really, V and Mel, they really believed in me, or they really believe in me. And kind of, seeing actionably how much they put on the line, because this is everything to us, right? Like we're going to come out of college and we're going to do this full time, and we're committing, every waking hour that is not, school, friends or family, right? Really just the bare bones. And this is more important than school for us, really. They're putting that towards ClipsAI, right? And so we're all riding on each other. We're all like trusting each other to do it, right? Because if any of us fails to a certain extent, like the whole company goes under and we lose everything, right? So the fact that they would trust me with really a core part of the product, which is to make the clips, it spoke volumes to me, and it felt, it often reinforced the idea that, I can do this and I will do this. And, I think we always have like random things we like to say, but I think one thing that always comes up is like, it seems impossible until it's done, right? That's something that we kind of say a lot, which is just that like, stop thinking so much about it. Just do it. Like it's gonna feel like you can't do it until you do it. So just stop, everyone's gonna say you can't do it. Just go for it. Like what's the worst that could happen? I would rather try my best and fail than just not try at all. So, and that honestly, that's a hard thing to come to terms to. It takes a while at least for me, to look in the mirror and say, I'm going to give this everything, and there's a great chance it doesn't work, right? And that's a scary thought. Like I could just be 27 and broke, have nothing, right? Of course, I wouldn't say have nothing, but to some extent, there's other parts of life, and it would feel like I've quote unquote wasted a little bit of time, and so those thoughts scare you, for sure. But I think just looking at it and saying like this, if I could do anything, I would do this. So even if I failed, like I would rather fail at this than do better at something that I didn't really want to do.
It's so funny you say that, because that was the exact wording that I used for myself at one point. When I was in my first job, I was working as an actuary, and I started seeing people around me get let go and get fired. And I was pretty young, so usually younger people don't tend to get fired because you're cheaper labor, so they don't mind keeping you around. But just as I started seeing people let go, I had the thought of, man, what if I get fired? And I did not enjoy what I was doing. I didn't like the company I was at. And I was like, I'd be really freaking pissed if I got fired from this damn job that I don't even want. But when you touched on something else that I wanted to go into a little bit, and that was the financial aspect of it. I really love that you guys are pursuing this first and foremost as solving an issue for yourself and for other people. And then now you've also conceptualized it into a larger, broader goal of, we want to improve the quality of content on the internet because we've been beneficiaries of great content, and we want to pay that forward and improve it forward for everybody and for people coming before us. How have you thought about it in terms of the money aspect? Because like you said, you're graduating next year. There's the real world pressures and bills and all the things that come with that. What are your guys' thoughts on the moment in terms of the financial component of it?
I can give you my firm opinion on the money and such, and then I can speak a little bit on Armel and V. I don't want to speak too much for them as far as the financial stuff goes, but I've thought a lot about what money can do, what it means to me, what I would like to do with it, etc. And I think maybe somewhere around junior year of high school or so, I came to the conclusion that money is not going to, it's really not going to buy me anything. I think that, the saying that money doesn't buy happiness is like really true. I do think though, as a caveat, like if you're below some certain means, right, there are real suffering that you can suffer. There's a real pain in not having enough to, feed a child or just get enough food for the day. Like those are real problems that exist. But I think once you hit a certain threshold and you're comfortable enough and you have enough luxuries in life, then there's really not much else to be gained from the extra money regarding personal enjoyment, I would say. I think there's certainly things that can be helpful, but I think on the whole, I think for me personally, I think if I made, I don't know, maybe 70,000, anything after that is just like, maybe even lower, maybe 50,000. Like I don't think I'd be a happier person, right? Or I don't think like my life would significantly change.
Can I just ask, where did you come up with, not even that specifically number, but that concept? You said when you were junior in high school, so maybe 16, 17. How did you come to that conclusion at that point in time?
I spent a lot of time, I guess maybe my freshman or sophomore year in high school, kind of, doing like the really, you'd see like some YouTube video and it's like, you can do, what was it? There's a bunch of videos that would be like, you can do Shopify and you make $100 a week, and you can do real estate and you'll make this much money, and you can do, you can make an Instagram account and you can get people to drive them to your website and get money off the ads, whatever it was. And so I spent a lot of time, trying to get my bread. I was trying to stack it. I was trying to get my check, right? Like everyone. And so, I spent a lot of time just trying to figure out like how to get money early in high school, as well as just generally thinking about the idea of money. It seemed like a lot of things revolve around money. It's powerful, has a lot of influence. It's an important part of really everything, I guess. It seems to play, everything can be traced back to the money in some form, it seems like. So it seemed obvious that would be something I would like to understand. And it became more obvious, though, as I went along, that there wasn't anything in particular that I wanted other than just to have the money, if that makes sense. Like it felt like I wanted the money to have the money because other people had money and people said it was cool and people said you have this and, you're promised X, Y, and Z. And somewhere along the way I was like, that doesn't seem true, right? Like, and then, and you'll see interviews of, I think I saw one interview of Tom Brady. It was like on ABC, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years ago. And you just like, there's this clip of him where he's like, he's like at his peak, right? He's already won a few Super Bowls. His wife is a supermodel at that point. I think they're not together anymore, but she made more money than him, and he makes already who knows how much money. And he was just like, "There's got to be something more to life, right?" And I'm just like, "What? You're kidding me, right?" Like I'm like a 14-year-old boy. I'm like, there's no way he just said that, right? Because that's everything that I wanted as like as a young kid. I'm like, there's nothing else I could want more than that, right? And then to hear him say that and hear other people say similar things, you're just kind of like, there really must be something else, right? And then I kind of dug deeper and I was like, okay, well, how could I validate or invalidate some of these ideas? And it really became obvious once I started doing things, which is that the more things I did for other people, the more I enjoyed my day-to-day life. The more things that, if people asked me for help, let me help them. And I felt better the rest of the day. People ask me X, Y, Z, and sometimes you can't because it's just such as life. But if you can, and it's and it's helpful to do, then it was a good thing to do. And the more things I did purely for myself, not in a bad, just if it was only for, let's say, the money, right? I lost motivation. I didn't want to do it. I didn't care. And so it was kind of things like that. It was those small actions where I was like, I think this is true. I think this is true. I think I've heard enough people say this that I really think that if I could get away from the idea that money is going to get me something, and that if I could really shift my ideas towards helping other people, there's something about service that is really powerful, that is really unique in terms of how it makes me, but I'm sure really most people feel in the long run. So that's kind of how I got to that point, I would say.
So we have Tom Brady to thank for dispelling the myth that money and supermodels.
He's the greatest.
That's incredible, man. And that's incredible that you even thinking about that at that point in your life and you thought about how to test some of those ideas and look into them. Just to share a little bit personally, I think I've been on a similar journey as well. Probably around the same time you were trying to make Shopify stores, I was too, and trying to make side hustles and things like that. For me, it wasn't even about trying to make millions of dollars. I was just trying to get liberated from the job that I was working with at the time. And I want to be time rich, I guess you could call it. I want to have the time to spend more time traveling and spend more time with friends and family and pursuing projects that I care about. But yeah, along the way, definitely ran up against the same concept of money isn't the answer. I think it was Kevin Kelly, who you could look him up, super fascinating guy. He said something along the lines of figure out what it is you want in life, and more times than not, you realize money is not the route to get there. So I think it's incredible, man, that you've been on that journey from such a young age, and it's already, paying dividends because you're pursuing a project that is not money first. You're not looking to see how you could just make millions of dollars and, have a huge exit and things like that. You guys are starting with an impact. And I think when you're able to do that and you actually identify an impact and the intersection between that and a need, I think that's when you could create something really great. So I think you guys are certainly on a really interesting and cool track with ClipsAI, with what you're doing.
I really appreciate it. I do want to dive in more. What do you think is like something actionable or replicable that other people could do to really help separate, for themselves, the wheat from the chaff in terms of what is the thing I want to do versus what is the thing that is going to make me feel safe, or is a thing that my parents will be cool with, or is a thing that all my friends are doing. Do you have any tips there in terms of saying, like, how would you go about telling someone, if you could, even yourself, just how would you go about separating those things? Because I know for myself, I often conflate them, and I have a hard time really understanding even my own thoughts and my own feelings. Do you have any words of wisdom there or thoughts there?
I think it would start with trying to build as much self-awareness as possible. All I know is for me, I just started doing that through writing. I started journaling a lot. And again, I was never a writer. I was always a math person. I took one writing class in college, did fine in it, but beyond that, I never really wrote. And then I found myself just after I graduated college and I started working, and I found myself feeling all of these things of, shit, like I feel like I'm in a bad spot. I made some wrong choices.
Right.
I found myself just being drawn to writing. That just felt like the outlet that made sense for me at that point in time. And so I just started journaling and fleshing my ideas out on paper.
And this is just like free flowing. You're just writing your thoughts down, not trying to censor anything.
Not trying to censor anything. Not with the intention of sharing it. Sometimes if I wanted to, I would share it with some close friends. If I wanted, I felt compelled to, and I knew I was, it was a safe enough space to share these things with them. But that's just how and to this day, I still write to get my thoughts out. People say,
how often do you write?
Well, I will say it's funny because I've been in a relationship now for 3.5 years. And since I started dating my girlfriend, I've started writing drastically less because she's kind of my journal now.
You can talk through things with her. For sure.
But there was a point before her and I started dating where I was commuting into Manhattan. I was living in Brooklyn, and I had about a 45-minute to an hour commute. And every morning when I got in the train, I would journal. So it was 5 days a week type of thing at that point in time. And it really was just, stream of consciousness. What am I thinking? And sometimes I would go back and revisit some of the themes over the course of the week, over the course of the month. I'm saying, okay, I'm thinking a lot about this. What does that mean? What does that tell me? So I think, that's what's worked for me. Talking to people, as I mentioned, my girlfriend also, I have some really great friends. I'm fortunate to have some really great friends that I could have these kinds of conversations with. And, they've known me for a long time. They've seen me grow. So they're able to provide unbiased input. And that's the thing, obviously your family and your parents know you well, but they also have different intentions for you. Your parents want you to make the safe choice. Understandably, I'm sure when we have kids, that's what we're going to want for our kids as well. But if you could find people that don't have all those other layers that could give you feedback, I think that also could be something that could really help with that process.
Yeah, that's some great advice. I like that a lot. To shift the conversation a little bit, you talked earlier about, like, I want to be time rich, right? I don't want to be, you didn't say you didn't want to be money rich, but I guess the implication I got was that, like, money was not like the base unit that you thought of value in. I was curious, like, to you, like, because I feel like, I guess for me, I always think in some, if I do this, like, what am I losing? And I have, some thoughts on like how I determine value. But like, I was wondering, like, how do you think of, like, how do you determine if something is or isn't valuable? If it's not, maybe it is money, but like, what do you use as a proxy to try to give something some, I don't know, some level of, oh, I do want to do this, or I don't want to do this, or how do you think about decisions like that? I was just curious.
I think it's really just a gut feeling. Doing things, trying things. I mean, there's so many different things that I've pursued, and then I wouldn't stick with them. And then when I reflect back on it, after I got past, feeling bad that I quit, what came out of that is just recognizing that, yeah, that didn't feel right. So I don't feel bad. So it's really just trying to get more in tune with, I guess, your intuition. If you're spiritual, you might consider it something divine through prayer or something like that. But yeah, just that gut feeling of what feels good. And, to give a concrete example, the last job I had was really well paying, and I could have stuck it out and continued to make more and more money that way, but it just didn't feel good. I felt like you were saying, for me, I feel similarly that there's at some point diminishing returns for money. Of course, there's a certain level, there's a certain floor you want to be above, but after a certain point, I'm just like, I don't want to keep trading my time for this.
Is there ever times where like your gut feeling like leads you astray a little bit, or have you mostly felt like, do you look back and you're kind of like, I should have just followed what my gut said?
I think as long as the decision I made at that point in time, I had sound reasoning behind it. If I was acting, if I could look back and say, yeah, Mike, you acted recklessly there. Like, you didn't think that through. Like, it blew up in your face, understandably. Those are the only times where I could look back and be like, yeah, come on, you should have handled that better. But if I thought through something in the moment and it felt right at the moment and it just had an outcome that wasn't what I was expecting, how could you feel bad about that? You made the best decision you could at that point in time. At least that's how I think about it for myself.
I agree, not dwelling too much on the past. We talked about this when I first got here briefly, but we both played basketball, and so I was mostly a shooter. That was my main job. If I got the ball, like, I was shooting, right? Like, that was why they passed me the ball. Like, I was gonna shoot. But we always had this saying, which was that, like, if you miss a shot, like, short-term memory, let it go, like, move on to the next. And that general idea of just like letting it go, like, it happened, like, it is what it is. And moving on, I try to really hit that hard, because, like you said, if you dwell in the past, it doesn't really help too much. Although I do think there's definitely something to be said for, looking about like how you made certain decisions and going about making them better in the future. But on the whole, for sure, that makes a lot of sense. I agree.
How are you thinking about juggling the competing interests between what it is that you want, what you want to pursue with going full-time with ClipsAI, with also, like you were saying, what your parents might want, or what your friends are doing, or what might be cool, or, what might attract the people that you want to be with, or whatever? How are you trying to juggle that for yourself?
Yeah, I think that, so there's been an interesting phenomenon the longer I've done this. Not to say that I've done it that long, but as I've decided, like, hey, I'm going to do this, and it's going to be risky, and it might not work, and it's going to take a lot of sacrifice. I'm not going to be able to go out on the weekends, really. Like, I might not see my friends as much. Of course, to be clear, I do value my friends a lot. If you ask Mel or anyone who knows me, like, people are vital, I think, to anyone's life, and you should really value your friends and your family. Never let them go. But by the same token, there's a lot of sacrifice that goes into doing something like this. And I think something that's kind of interesting, which was that, like, after I took that leap, no one really said anything, right? Like, no one was like, like, you shouldn't do this. Like, don't stop. Like, no, don't do that. My dad and for the longest time, my parents were like, get out, have the good engineering degree, go get the good job, whatever. And I was like, Dad, that's just not what I want to do. I'm putting everything I got into this, and we're riding with this. And, at first my dad was like, sure, right? I'm 19 when this happened, we started this. So my dad's probably just like, it's a phase. He'll do it, realize that it's not what he wants. And, and that's a natural thought, I'm sure, for a parent. It takes a long time. There's lots of phases that I feel like I've gone through. I don't feel like this is a phase though, right? And so when I just said, I'm going to do this, now my dad's at the point where, like, he's just like, how's the business going? Like, what's going on? He's interested, right? And I think the same thing has happened with a lot of my friends and really people around me, which is like, I think people actually are more drawn to talk about it, or they're more interested, and I feel like I actually have better connections because I've done it. And so the weird thing was, like, as much as I felt like it would be a lot of friction, and at first it was hard to like make that jump. Once I made it, it was way easier. Like, it wasn't like, at least on like a personal front. Like, I finally got to a point where like everyone just kind of accepted like that this is something I do, and like, cool. And people, they just wanted to know. And once I just went for it, I think I actually, really took a more mindset of like, this is something that I want to do. This is kind of who I am, and not just like screw everyone else, but like screw everyone else. Like, it's like, and I think people appreciated that, and I think they were just like, yeah, we're gonna go with that. So I think on the whole, once I decided to do it, it was way easier than I expected. Of course, there's some friction with everything, but I think the hardest part was just doing the jump. I think that took a long time for us to really fully immerse ourselves into what this actually meant. That was the hard part.